give just a minute for some people come in. I can see the numbers building quickly as participants are joining the WebEx, and then we'll get started with some introductions. Take a big stretch. Make sure your water, your coffee's topped up.
Already on it.
Very good. All right, let's commence with some introductions. We certainly have a lot of information to cover, so we want to do that. First and foremost, everyone, welcome to our annual session on understanding HR trends and how to prioritize them. My name is Dan Whitmarsh. I'm a senior solutions consultant here at HR Strategies Consulting, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, I want to introduce to you my colleague, Leslie Dalzell, who is with me. She's our senior HR consultant coming from Vancouver today. I'm in the snowy confines of just outside of Toronto. Welcome from wherever you are on the planet. So housekeeping wise, my brilliant and talented contributor here, Leslie, co-contributor, is going to discuss with us and share with us a whole bunch of information on the top 12 trends that we've prioritized from the synopsis of all the research that we've collected. Our time today, I'm just going to give you a quick background and introduction on HR Strategies Consulting. Then I'm going to talk to you about the process we use so you understand the science behind the magic that's going to come out. And then we're going to dive into each of the top trending items. And then we're going to go through an exercise at the end, because understanding the items is one thing, and where people place them and how they're prioritized across, a collective pool doesn't mean that that's right for you. We have to figure out a way that you can use this information in a way that's meaningful to help advance the progress of your HR practices inside of your organization. And then finally, we'll leave some time at the end for question and answers and next steps. So, housekeeping note, there is a chat function, right? So if you wanted to send a chat, let me just test it out here. I'm going to say to everyone, do I have that capability to chat with all? Let's try it. So feel free to use the chat or the QA function. And while I'm talking, Leslie will do her best to keep up with those answers and vice versa. Okay, so let's get started. Lots to cover. HRSC is HR Strategies Consulting. That's the acronym we go by. We, at a glance, you just to know a little bit about us. We are not newcomers to the space. We've been around for quite some time. We've got, lots of qualified professionals. We're working in 4 different countries. Stay tuned, soon to be 5, if I'm led to believe correctly. We are multi-certified. We cut our teeth around pay equity and HR consulting. We are proudly women-owned We Connect business. And we have 3 major lines of business. One is around strategic consulting. Leslie is a dominant player on that team. It's our human capital management practice. We do a lot of wonderful things helping companies with consulting, job evaluation markets, HR technology readiness assessments, solution adoption, change management. Leslie herself is PROSI certified. The second bucket here, and these do definitely overlap, they're not meant to be mutually exclusive, is around HRIT practice. We found, doing 30 years of consulting, that we used to lead people to the door of making technology decisions, and we went down that path ourselves as we started to invest in technology and realized that we could partner with some of the best technologies in the marketplace so that we can take clients through the phases of defining what they need to do, what technologies might fit, and then actually provide and sell that service to them. And then further extension from that, we've now built out a support team. So companies who have bought technology elsewhere can come to us to get ongoing support, account management services or project management, or even staff aug services to run their technology or make changes to the platforms that they have. So there's a lot going on from that respect inside. And first biggest question you're probably going to have before we get into the content is this deck coming to you? Absolutely, right? So, if you want this information in this deck, we have a step at the end where you can reach out to Leslie or myself, and we'll get you that information so that you get a copy of the resources from today's presentation, okay? Let's talk about the process. This is the fun part of this job. It really, really is. We start with the trending process. So, Understanding some things here is really, we start with just basic searches of all the usual suspects that we know do annual trends reports. And we have to be very careful about who we pick, because, you know, if we look at a vendor in the recruitment landscape and they publish their top 5 trends for HR, it's recruitment centric. If we look at somebody from the payroll side or benefit side, it's going to be benefit centric. And we want to make sure we get a good cross section, not just, you know, singular module or talent management practice specific, but HR generally specific. So we've been collecting the same research, and we continue to use the same analysts over and over again, but get their updated versions. And we start with collecting all of these well-known names and places who publish research. And then Leslie and I compile all this down into spreadsheets where the resources are, and then we start sorting by all the issues and trends that each article is talking about. We start then theming them. We've, for continuity's sakes, have kept with the same group of themes we've been using for the past 3 years so that we can compare apples and apples. And then we'll look for sub-themes amongst that. So really, that's the fun part, is digesting all of this research in preparation for this work. It's a wonderful read. And if anybody would ever like copies of this, I'm happy to send out our resource list of what we pulled in as something that we could share with you. So once we've got all that information collected, we do counts of this information. So how many times did these pieces get mentioned in all of this research? And then we take notes on the particular context in which it's mentioned, because they could talk about DEI, but it might be a recruitment specific play or a technology specific play. So we have to understand how that goes. And a note on these themes is that in the past years when we've done this, they were very siloed and almost discrete type events. And Leslie and I both commented as we were doing our meetings with our consulting teams to get their input on these items, is that we see things are really starting to overlap and be cross-modality or domains, between domains. So, you know, a lot of times we really had a head scratcher of where some of these items belonged, and in some cases we put them in both, and we'll see that recur today. So it's not like it's one size fits conveniently in one spot. And, you know, what's really also forward-facing or changing in the way these analysts are producing these reports is that they're including discussions around implications. They're suggesting solutions. They're talking about impact. They're talking about level of effort. Where in the 25 plus years I've been monitoring the space, you really didn't get that type of commentary. So the shifting in this research has been more prescriptive than descriptive. Leslie, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's very different this year than we've seen in other years on what they're reporting, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so with no further ado, let's get to the list of all of these items. Here they are in alphabetically listed, and then we're going to take a statistical look at them shortly. So we've got AI, technology, changing HR, and we're going to do a deeper definition as we explore the context of each items when we get to talking about all of the items. Diversity and inclusion, belonging, health, safety, and wellness. This is a good one. Human experience management, we're going to refer to as HXM. We've got job and role transformation. We've got learning and development. We've got data and measurement. Of course, we have an other category to capture things that really don't conveniently fit out here. And then we've also got performance management, recruiting, and workforce planning. So with that, I'm going to continue to hold the mouse here, but I'm going to pass to my colleague Leslie to talk about the initial insights that we have here.
Yeah, so as Dan has eloquently said, we've seen a lot of overlap this year and a lot more themes blending together than we've seen in the past. So we just want to do a little bit of a visual here. A lot of those themes are centered around the human experience or the employee experience. And I'm going to say human experience because it's looking at the employee from a more holistic practice. And as we go through each of these different 12 themes and items, you're going to see some repetitiveness a little bit, just because they're so blended together that certain areas are touching various themes throughout the times. Okay, so let's actually take a look at 2023, and we're going to look at what we have found. So we did this sort of two ways. We did this as a count of how many times we saw a theme, as well as we did a percentage as well. So the big theme this year was change HR. We saw that at about 25% of the articles that we've read. We saw that theme coming through. The HXM, the employee experience, human experience, came in pretty close. But even though I said, like, even though it's only second, it's still the big pillar between all of these themes. And change HR obviously is what's surrounding it as well. And then we've got learning and development, DEI, health and safety, job role transformation at 7%, performance management at 6%, measurement at 6%, recruiting 6%, AI and technology at 4%, workforce planning, and then other at 3%. So what's different this year? So we took data from the last 3 years. We wanted to really compare how things are trending year over year. So you can see we have the green is 2021, the purple is 2022, and the blue is this year. So we thought it'd be very interesting to have these stats up there. So if you look at change HR, you'll see from 2021 to now, there's about a 10% increase in regards to change HR, about 4% from 22 to 21. And same with I'm just going to say human experience because I, for some reason, cannot say the word X today.
HX don't go.
Yeah, and so there's it wasn't a significant change. It had a small drop last year, but went up to 12%. And so it was very, very interesting for us. And Dan, you just feel free to jump in too if you have some comments on this one, because I know you and I've had some interesting discussions on this, on what this looked like. And you'll see, interestingly, in 2021, other was actually a big category. And it's now been more defined as the years have gone on, because those others have become more solid players in regards to the things that we have been seeing. So what has been trending upward this year? So this year we're looking at change HR, the human experience, because I'm not saying X, learning and development, and performance management. Those are the areas that we saw that were trending up this year from over last year. For those that stayed neutral, we have measurement and then other. So those ones staying about the same. And for those with a slight decrease, DEI, health and safety, job role transformation, recruitment, and workforce planning, and technology. Now, I just want to make a note, even though we saw this as a decrease, it doesn't mean that it has not been significant. And we're going to go through, they're still not significant. And we're going to go through that when we go through each of the topics. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. So let's jump into each individual item and talk about the specific function. So, we're going to do this in order of low magnitude, things that were not as important, all the way up to the things that became most important. And I think it was 25% for change HR, which means 1 in 4 of the items discussed had implications on how we change HR. Whereas the other category is really the place where, this is a general catch-all for all the round items that clearly don't fit in the square holes of our nomenclature. A few interesting items emerging here include innovation, data privacy, employee agency, and democratization of work. Innovation, it really kind of transpires and fits across all of these elements, but really, it kind of rests as its own way because it can be achieved in so many different parts. Data privacy was really interesting. As we become increasingly more and more a digital operation or use HR systems or digitalized processes, we're collecting data, and it's tied to individuals and their usage of said data. And so we're really talking about the opportunity to put policies in place and make transparent what information you're collecting about how people are doing. And this really dovetails off the fact that 78% of the workforce thinks they're being spied on by their employer, right? From a digital standpoint. Employee agency, there's a trend here that Leslie's going to talk to later in the presentation around the rise of use of gig or contingent workforce. And really, what we're saying here is that unions and labor laws are being bolstered to kind of support and protect the employees. So the pendulum is really resting and giving impetus more on corporate responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of employees, which is an ongoing theme we're going to hear. And then last, around democratization. And this means a lot of things, but really recognizing the managers are sandwiched in between the executive level and the bottom front level of your organizations. And they are the pillars of strength that really gap and set the communication process in place. So there need to be a true two-way conduit of information. A theme that we've heard many times before is the old axiom of telling managers what, or sorry, of the top of the company telling the middle what they need to have done to the bottom, just doesn't create the alignment, the engagement, or the results that it used to. It's no longer satisfactory to do that. It has to be a true two-way, and we have to listen, and that's going to be a theme that comes up all the time as we talk to these different items. So let's move to the first true item other than the other catch-all category. This is artificial intelligence and technology. A few focus areas rose here, slight decrease in time, -3%. I wouldn't read too much into that, because if you looked at it from 2021, it's still up overall. And I think there's also factors here that say, this is not so much falling off of the map. I think it's just widely accepted and nobody's calling out the obvious that everybody's already starting to do this. And really what we have here in these focus areas is different ways to control bias. Initially, the use of AI and technology was really meant to kind of help speed decision making. And really what spun out of that is the ability to manage for hiring manager bias. That's certainly been the dominant talk track for recruitment to help predict and select employees. But now we're seeing this leveraging of artificial intelligence or algorithms beyond recruitment. So we're using them in career development, succession plans, rewards, compensation, and even pay. So it's really helping us manage the bias. Now, the other side of this is that we can use them as cultural concierge services or chat-based assistance programs. So we're already doing this in so many cases with external client groups where their first level of triage with an organization is about bumping into a chatbot who kind of filters them and focuses them into an area. We should be doing that internally to help fortify our culture or help give assistance. And we're going to talk more about that from a learning and development perspective as well. So let me segue to the next item, which is around workforce planning. Then Leslie's going to talk to you about that one.
Okay, so workforce planning. So we saw a slight decrease in this year. So workforce planning, I just want to say, it is the process of analyzing, forecasting, and planning your workforce supply and demand. This really hasn't changed much, even though it says a -3% decrease. The focus last year and continues to be this year is based on skill-based hiring, and this is still holding true. So companies right now that are doing skill-based hiring and workforce planning are not just focusing on what they have in-house, they're looking at what they need. And this really draws together, again, that overlap of your workforce planning in regards to learning and development, as well as into your recruitment efforts, and how those two departments really need to be connecting a little bit more clearly and more connectively to make sure that we have the right skills in-house. There's also, as Dan had said, a growth in the contingent workforce, and this is information that HR or companies are not capturing. And as Dan mentioned before, these are becoming a bigger part of our workforce. They're like the Uber drivers, the YouTubers, I think they talked about Airbnbs, that whole industry. And we really don't know much about them at all. And so this is information that we don't have, and this could be actually a big driving force in regards to how we actually plan for our employees and plan for our workforces. Retention, of course, is part of this as well, as you can see up here. I'm not going to really dive into retention too much in this section. I'm going to address a little bit further down. Okay. Next, so measurement, yay! So measurement really didn't see much change here. Last year, this was a big focus area. organizations are really starting to utilize these a bit more. They're investing in those data platforms. They're focusing on more all of aspects of HR. So usually when you're thinking about metrics, recruitment's always kind of first front and center, engagement, sort of another one. And now we're looking at that expanding into areas even like learning and development as well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. This one's just carrying on as it has been over the next little while, and it's still very important, but yeah. So recruitment. Again, we've done a lot of overlap with performance management already. Recruitment, even though you're seeing a decrease, which is interesting because it still is a candidate market right now. I personally do some recruitment as well. I'm seeing the shift come back, as I'm sure people out there have also seen us. We're seeing a little bit of shift come back, but ideally the candidates still have the power. So I know for those that do some recruitment, I know first question I always get is it a hybrid environment? How many days do I have to come into the office? That is one of the first questions that I get out of the gate when talking with candidates. So they still have the power, but as a recruitment focus this year, and it has been last year, we're really starting to connect with those talents globally. With our workplaces changing and how we work, we're able to look at employees that are just not in our geographical area. And of course, this has been very topical over the last few months, is in regards to the recession. So the recession, there's concern over a recession. Recession is looming. What does that look like? Is recruitment going to be slowing down? And this is also where we see the overlap in regards to the learning and development, the skill base, looking what you have in-house as well, and starting to move people up the ladder from that perspective. And as we've talked about, we're talking a lot about skill-based hiring and upskilling. The interesting thing, and this has been a shift, and even I've noticed it as a shift as someone that does it, is you're looking more for the ability. So when you're looking at candidates, so the credentials, the past experience, yes, that's absolutely there, but you're really looking for the ability for people to be able to take on a job and be able to learn. And that is becoming a little bit more predominant in the recruitment area. And then of course, benefits as well. This includes, benefits or people say benefits are benefits, but candidates are looking for more holistic benefits. They're looking for ones that could be a little bit more personalized, as Dan had talked about before. And so this is really becoming a driving factor with candidates for last year, and I think for this year as well.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see with all the recent layoffs how much that shift in power will be taken away from the candidates or not. So I suppose that's a whole hour WebEx in its own. Let's shift to the next topic around performance. I think this is still you, Leslie.
I think this is still me. So in performance management, we saw about a 4% increase. So over the past couple of years, the focus for organizations really has been transitioning to that remote hybrid work environment. It really has been focused on the where employees are working, what are we going to do about it, all of that. But now the focus is on the how. So most organizations have decided how they're going to work, either back at the office, hybrid, flexibility, remote, however that is. And now it's focusing on the how. And that means focusing on how employees are going to produce, what are our new metrics? Like the 9 to 5, going in the office, punching the clock isn't there anymore. So what are we expecting from our employees? And what are those benchmarks? This is where performance management really is going to carry a lot of more weight. And how we do it is going to impact whether or not we can be engaging to our employees, whether or not we can retain them. And again, upskilling and building internally. This is the crutch here. And again, focus on the recruitment side, the learning and development, how that all intertwines together. One-on-ones, this became pretty popular a few years ago, and especially when we went to remote, the one-on-ones has really carried a lot of weight. It's really important that we do those one-on-ones, those check-ins, we get those real-time feedback. That is the key to success. And Dan had mentioned as well about first-time leaders. So we've got some first-time leaders that have been brought up in this environment, and they really are one of the biggest targets this year, is looking at our first-time leaders. And I would even say all leaders in regards to this and how to manage their people. It's different when people are working remotely or even working hybrid. We have to be very conscious that we're not having a proximity bias for those that are going into the office. It's going to be a lot of learning on how to work with such a diverse workforce in regards to where they are. And finally, there was a consistent message as well in regards to connecting jobs and pay to performance. This is always a hot button topic for everyone, especially in the HR world, is whether or not we you do that. And then the other piece is, do we make it transparent? And that is another thing that also came through, is about pay transparency. That was one thing that Dan and I, when we went through this, we're like, wow, there's a lot of discussion on pay transparency and how employees actually are looking for that. But I'm going to go into that a little bit later as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to pick up here and I'm going to talk about job and role transformation. There's a lot here to digest, but first I wanted to define it for us. So when we talk about job and role transformation, we're really talking about the ways that organizations or jobs and employees negotiate their terms of mutual contribution, how they get together and they make work. So if you think about the average company, the largest single operating expense is typically payroll, your people. Average in North America, I found, is about 70 to 90%, depending upon what your product is. And that's the total percentage each payroll of your operating cost, right? So imagine companies, as Leslie pointed out, that use a lot of gig or contingent labor, or don't even have them as employees per se, like an Uber, where they don't know anything about the drivers, or YouTube, we know nothing about the contributors, or the employee or Airbnb property owners. Your largest source of revenue is coming directly from people that you know almost nothing about. They don't know, HR doesn't know truly their skills, strengths, weaknesses, and many would argue that it's just not important. But imagine, if you could, that if you did know this and you had two-way dialogue, the opportunity to innovate and improve the experience for all parties could go through the roof, right? The potential is massive. You know, and significant discourse is really taking place at all levels. We hear it at the C-suite. We read about it continuously in HR. Our clients are striving for this. And then it came through in all the analyst reports. It's about the dominance that Leslie pointed out of those soft skills over the hard skills. If you consider that most hard skills have a half-life of about 5 years, right? So you're hiring for somebody with a hard skill that has a half-life of 5 years and 10 years experience. It's no longer going to be needed down the road, but a soft skill lasts forever. Those influence things, and I've got more to say on soft skills as we get going through this process. So it's also really worth taking note here that called out is the two-way mutual influence between employees, that's what I call E's, and orgs. Right, is that it's not that cascading that we mentioned, top to middle to bottom. It's got to be a two-way street where we're putting things in. So key focus areas: skills-based economies, internal and external to the organization for recruitment or promotions. You're measuring output versus the hours put in. You want to see productivity, and you don't really care about how much time it takes because you're not paying salaried people to do that. If it's hourly, it could be different for sure. And the where and when of work, this is a recurring theme we're going to see change. Doesn't matter so much. Employees are getting more control over this, and they're setting new employee-employer social contracts. And as we've already talked about, the rise in the gig economy and the contingents. So let's switch to the next enter empathy and listening. How did I miss that one?
I think you talked about soft skills, so you're good there.
Right. So really a lot of research is talking about deploying specific training to that mid-level of the organization and teaching them to be empathetic if they're not, because that allows for that true two-way dialogue. All right, so next one on our topic is health and safety and wellness. Now, way back when we did this, the first two versions of this 2-3 years ago, there was 3 categories to this slice of pie. One of them was physical safety, and that has actually disappeared off of this slide, not intentionally, but so what we're really talking about here is the dedicated focus to ensure that everyone in the organization has the right programs or policies in place to help mitigate any kind of employee harm or burnout, while simultaneously really spurning promotion of their well-being. And we broke this into two sides. There's a wellness side, which is overall wellness, and there's a mental health side. So this item seems to be still a mid-level priority. It's only 7%, but it really did touch on all of the other topics that we talked about. So it shouldn't be, brushed aside or marginalized. But this, we're looking at the wellness side of it. We're talking about using your wellness initiatives as an EVP. Leslie brought that up in the recruiting side. That's what candidates want to hear. What are you doing for me? What do you give me as a candidate if I'm on the marketplace, right? So the implications are huge, recruiting, performance. Managers need to be checking in on the performance and the well-being of people, and that's the empathy thing we just talked about. We need to talk about this because the job and the role transformation has happened. It's going to have implications on the experience or the HXM side of the equation. It also has implications for change HR because it includes all the comments around wellness. So we may have to define things that we didn't define before. So we've got lots to cover here. And we may even have to include learning and development initiatives because we need to put training in place so that our managers are equipped to talk about wellness because most of them may not be comfortable with that. On the other side of this, we've got mental health. So, again, that empathy crops out. We've got empathy of managers, we've got quiet quitting and burnout, and we've got psychological safety. So a couple things really kind of came out of this, and I want to summarize this up if I can. Number one, this came up in more spots than just the health and safety item. We heard lots of researchers cite statistics around psychological safety of all employees, which is largely the right to speak up and be heard, and how paramount this is in functional organizations. And they had lots of great documentation that says non-functional or non-existent dysfunctional organizations just don't have psychological safety of their employees. There's fear. And then secondly, HR needs to put on your own oxygen mask first. That was cited 3 times by different researchers, with HR specific burnout being 41% during the last 3 years versus 29% for business leaders and 19 for knowledge workers and about 22 for frontline workers, who traditionally the media has said were the largest group of burnout, but it turns out HR is actually that group. And, I think about the wellness and safety of people. One of my favorite people in the space who covers it. He's a poet, ironically, and a consultant. His name is David White. And he used to do this talk track on recruitment efforts and how we go out and find these massively skilled, experienced veteran people who have all this wonderful lives and experiences to bring to the table. And we bring them inside our organization. We make them do the same thing over and over again and ignore everything about them. And that's going to change with the human experience management that we're going to talk about shortly. But before we get to that, Leslie's going to pick up here on DEIB.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I just wanted to add something else in regards to the health and safety side as well. One of the analyst articles that we read as well talked about actually bringing trauma counselors in to do training for employees and mid-managers as well, which I thought was very, 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 very interesting. It's because of the burnout and because of the quiet quitting and the psychological piece. And I thought that was really, really quite interesting. So I just wanted to add that piece in there. So DEIB. So it did see a small decrease from last year. And I just want to make sure, this isn't because DEIB is losing focus. In 2020 and 2021, organizations were starting to put together their DEI strategies. In 2022, we saw these strategies put into action and companies embedding these into their cultures. For most organizations, the DEIB started with recruitment efforts, and that's where a lot of it starts. This year, though, the efforts are moving beyond recruitment. It's moving into learning development. It's moving into succession planning and culture building. Essentially, DEIB is now being more integrated into the full employee cycle. So it's not that DEIB has lost traction, it's just that it's actually gained traction. And it's not becoming, we got to do it. It's being done, which is great. And now it's just keeping it moving forward. So one of the things I thought was actually quite interesting in one of the articles that we read was that DEIB and all the initiatives are currently run by HR. It's like 65% is all run by HR. This actually needs to change. So as HR practitioners, you know, we always get say, okay, we want to do DIB, you do it. HR, that's your mandate. But it's really a C-level mandate, and it has to be C-level owned. And the way that I look at it, and working with some organizations on their DEIB, is the way I look at it, it's got to be C-level championed, it's got to be HR supported, but it has to be employee driven. And if it's not employee driven, it'll never actually become part of your culture. And that would be one of the things that I would see if organizations are in that strategy piece and they're starting to implement. Really involve your employees in this. Get those committees together. Let them come to you with suggestions on how they want to see things move forward from a DEI perspective. Okay, back over to you, Dan.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump into learning and development, which you can see has a plus 5% increase. And we're going to talk about this in two sides. So here we're really focusing, the first being new learning, and then second being reskilling or upskilling. But just around the general learning and development opportunity, we're focusing on the ability to use training to advance both the soft skills that both Leslie and I have talked about in the other items, and the deeper technical skills that your organization needs to be successful. So we look at this from two vantage points: the new learning side, you know, getting net new skills acquired and bringing them into the organization, or reskilling and upskilling, which is, hey, bolstering or shoring up or improving existing baseline things we know we already have in our organization. From a new skills perspective, we're seeing some interesting trends here. We saw commentary around preparing HR first, quote that HR put their oxygen mask on first, because we feel that HR, with the number one item, which I'm going to give the cat, or the cat's already out of the bag, is changing HR. We need to equip HR first with the capabilities to advance its organizational skill sets. So that's the first thing. The second is that first-time leaders that Leslie mentioned earlier as well. You know, we're seeing people with the labor shortage trends happening where we're putting people into leadership roles who have never had leadership roles before. It's just a necessity that most organizations are facing. So we need to equip those first-time managers with the appropriate training to either check that their experiences are real and legit, or, you know, get new skills if they need them. And then we're looking, next item is around change management fatigue. I mean, this is real, folks. This happens. You just can't keep rolling out new programs without hitting, no matter how beneficial, without exposing your teams to change management fatigue. So being conscious of it is a great thing. Leslie's Prosci certified. She could probably do an hour WebEx alone in this topic, but you need to have the right mandates and change management around this, or even the best intents can fall to the wayside. The other part about this is that developmental opportunities are almost equal to dollars when recruiting these days. As Leslie mentioned, in the recruiting side, people are asking about, hey, is there opportunities here to improve and get new skills? Can I develop? Is there room to grow? And those are really valuable assets to promote in your EVP. The last part on the new learning, and this applies not just to new learning, it's going to apply to both the reskilling, upskilling here I'll talk about in a second, is that the system itself should become the vehicle of change. And I'm very passionate about this. I really believe that delivering learning in macro or microbytes or small bite-sized pieces, or in line within the system, beats the old days of, hey, go take a course on how to use an application and then come back to the office next week and use it. That doesn't work. The transfer just isn't there. It takes too long and you're taking people away from the work. But if they're in the system and they can get a little help icon or a chatbot or a piece of AI that pops up saying, stuck with what to do next, and they can consume a 1 or 2 or a 5-minute article or video about what they need to do in that system, the system is now becoming the learning tool. And that is really important because it decreases the footprint of time, increases adoption, and makes for better human experience management. We're going to talk about data shortly that's going there, right? So for reskilling and upskilling, we're more focused here on closing the gaps or advancing known skills. You know, doing this well increases your organizational performance. There's no doubt per employee. It can also bolster your culture and you really enhance cultural or enterprise-wide competencies. And companies that do this well are more agile and have better internal mobility, which really reduces your recruitment spend downstream. So remember that even though we're addressing enterprise-wide competencies, you have to give leeway to that middle level of your organization for managers to figure out what their specific team needs. Because you could have enterprise-wide competencies, but there might be additional ones that are team specific, and you have to allow for your managers to float that up and then deliver a solution or a system in getting that out there. The other part that's really interesting, the research pops out, is addressing the soft skills first increases the ability to adopt and learn new technical skills downline. So, you know, you think about the comical, I think it was a Far Side cartoon from back in the day about courses for ego management. Well, nobody would take that. But if you can ease the burden for those who are difficult or resistant to change and get them into courses, then they're more open to take new things. So you've got to break and work the soft skills first before you can actually apply the technical or hard skills that move downstream. And that gets us to the second of the highest rated items, which is human experience management. So I'm going to talk about this one too. We have three pieces to the pie here to consider. You can see that employee experience dominates with digitalization and personalization out there, and this is up year to year. What we're really doing here is evolving or defining human experience management, or HXM. I know Leslie had a tongue tied on that one. It's really the evolution of human capital management. Human capital management was collecting data on human capital. Human experience management is allowing people to blossom and flourish inside of a platform or a process or a technology that considers how they interact with it and what they get to get out of it, right? So, you know, the focus here is to consider how employees interact with all of these platforms on a day-to-day basis, and they need to love these systems. It's where they spend the majority of their time, right? So it's really the intersection between three critical items. Number one, the user interface. It's got to be good. It's got to be easy to understand and easy to do. And then secondly, with the works, the work that they're doing or the platforms through which the work is managed. And then third is their everyday behavior. They have this whole self model of this coming up, right? So the whole self model is an idea that task-oriented work, you know, it's only the starting point of productivity. You know, tasks don't necessarily get done without a real person showing up to do them, right? There's a great quote from the CEO of Southwest Airlines where she actually went to an in-person recruiting event and they advertised for all these job skills. And when she got there, she saw these people and realized, hey, these skills didn't show up. People showed up for these jobs. And she had to reshift her mind about how they brought people into the organization. And that's what made Southwest the success story that it is, right? So each person comes to work, they're full of ideas, innovations, emotions, faults as well, interests and aspirations. And if you don't let these items come out, you may never unlock their potential. So we have to remember, it's not that widget turner or that spreadsheet compiler that gets those tasks moved every day. Those are people, right? Happiness and attitude of those people are contagious, and they create either a world-class, wonderful experience for people who work with them or an encounter you'd rather forget. And you have to remember that happy people make happy customers and coworkers. It is contagious. So let them bring their personality, but let them bring their whole self to work and learn who these people are. We've already talked about that from a PM perspective. Now, the other parts of this are digitalization. And this is, you know, the metaverse. Here it comes. 3 or 4 times this was mentioned. Not sure where I stand on this, to be honest. And we both, Leslie and I, had a rough time with it, but I see its potential. And when they talk about the metaverse, they're not just saying, do virtual reality training. We know that works. That's been a big trend for years. The stats are clear and barely disputable. But the metaverse, they're extending now to virtual meetings, So instead of just doing a Teams-based meeting with your face on a camera, they're actually sending people in with avatars into social events and meeting and brushing shoulders with clients and coworkers that they don't normally meet. So it's not just, you know, I'm here and you can hear my voice and see my face. It's around having these people do activities online together as avatars. Pretty wicked thought when you think about it, but it's here, it's a reality, and companies are doing it and seeing significant results. The other parts about this, business system adoption, right? So if you're trying to get people to adopt to using platforms, digitalize them, because then it highlights what they are doing and what they're not doing, or where bottlenecks become, because data becomes available and it helps you make that digital transformation and save pens and papers and trees from being consumed, because it just makes sense, right? Now, the last part about this is personalization. We've discussed this briefly already, but it means productivity. Everybody likes to do things differently. Every time I log into somebody's application, you know, or we share screens at work, some people like clutter and they like a lot of columns, rows, filters, and data on. Other people hide everything and have minimalist approaches. So everybody should have the right or the ability to personalize things, because personalization means productivity. And not just the platform they use, they should be able to go beyond that and personalize when and where they do their work, if possible, right? They should be able to personalize their negotiation or their social contract or their work contract or their job role transformation. They should be able to personalize their term, their benefits, their perks, or even their future aspirations of what work means to them. So these are all really important things. The bottom line here, high-performing HXM organizations are 2.4 times better at DEI. And we know having good DEI initiatives produces productivity. 2 times more agile at companies with great HXM are 2 times more agile at responding to new opportunities than those that aren't. They're 1.9 times more innovative. Innovative sparks so many new products and platforms that you have to have innovation. 1.8 times more productive, and they have an overall 1.5 times organization performance or financial performance to companies that don't have good HXM. It makes sense. The other big side of this, to the wellness side, companies with good HXM are 20% less prone to burnout. Leslie, let's let you hit the last one on the list.
Well, that's a good segue, because as we talked about at the beginning, the human experience is really the center of everything. And as Dan has talked in that last slide about the human experience, there's a lot of making things a little bit more personal for the employee. And for an HR person, you're going, oh man, this is a lot of work. Which is why Change HR has been our biggest increase that we saw last year. And again, it was like 25% mentioned in various articles. So it is Change HR. So Change HR really is HR's role and focus and what they need to do differently for this year. And so the biggest piece to that was, you know, we saw 2020, 2021, we saw, you know, HR in the back office, you know, and then we saw that move over to being in the front office. We saw HR having to become more agile and more innovative as well. You know, it's interesting. I was actually an article I read this year, but I thought it actually applied to over the last couple of years for those of us that are in HR, is that we had to become a lot more comfortable with it's good enough for now and safe enough to try. I thought that was so fun. So funny. I'm like, yep, that seems to be the way that we've been going. In 2023, HR strategy really is the key. And here are some of the key terms that we've been looking at. You know, the employee experience we've talked about, stress, burn, and burnout levels / retention, skill development, internal mobility, succession planning, DEIB, ESG, which we'll talk about in a minute, compensation benefits, rethinking policies and practices, and change management. Those are all the elements that need to be considered in an HR strategy if you're looking at doing that this year. So I'm going to focus on only 3 of the top ones, or more the emerging themes that came out of this, and that's policies and practices, ESG, and compensation. So policies and practices, you're going, oh, here we go. Policies and practices, here we go again. Like, what's new about that? Well, as we know from Dan in the human experience slide that we have, it's that holistic approach that we need to take. It's about looking at personalizing this, and this is going to be a lot of heavy lifting for those of us in HR if we want to start incorporating some of those. But of course, the first thing that we need to do is obviously we need to make sure we're compliant. We need to audit our policies. We have to make sure that those minimum requirements are there. And then we need to try to incorporate that flexibility into it as well. There's no one size fits all answer anymore. We used to have one policy, one handbook that fit everyone. It just is not going to work in this environment anymore. And you need to look at things like, wellness, your mental wellness, work-life balance, all of that needs to be considered. And so ESG, Dan and I thought this was really interesting. This was the first year that this has come up in various articles and research that we did. And so it's environmental, social, and governance. And it's very interesting because it's just not what employees are looking for. Investors are actually applying these factors, these non-financial factors, by the way, as part of their analysis to process and identify material risks and growth opportunities. Board members and C-suite leaders say since the pandemic, it's increased expectations for companies to drive that social impact, that environmental sustainability, and inclusive growth. And this has really increased about 27% from last year. So this is quite significant. And it's interesting to see that analysts, investors, and the C-suite are looking at this.
And candidates.
Yes. And candidates, absolutely. Well, candidates are been pushing for it, and employees have been pushing for it. But I find it very interesting now that this is actually becoming a line item on investors and analysts and C-suites to be looking at as well, and incorporating that into their organizations. People are looking for organizations that make a difference. They have a reputation for valuing environment, for driving social issues. They want to focus on real world problems, so like war, food, climate change, all of that. And they want meaningful work that has an impact, So it is interesting. So the SHRM report said there's about 78% of candidate employees say it's important to work for a company that values DEIB and social issues. So this was a very interesting topic that came out of this, and it's been around for a while, but now it's being valued a little differently, which I think is quite interesting. And then the last piece I'm going to talk about here is compensation. I've kind of gone through this, and Dan has talked a little bit about this as well, but pay transparency really came out very loud and clear. This was probably one of the main topics when we were talking about change HR and what employees are looking for. So it's interesting. So then less than half employees actually have visibility into their pay band. 64% employees would actually like to have it made public. And there's a big push for companies to make their comp plans more transparent. And so an interesting piece too is a lot of states in the United States have actually mandated that compensation be put onto job descriptions. And so if you're putting it onto your job description, that opens that up for pay transparency within your organization. And it's really something that organizations are having to look at. In Canada, we don't necessarily have that per se. We do at the federal and provincial level when it's regulated, but there is a push on the private side to really get that pay transparency out there. And again, we've talked about compensation linking to jobs and performance. We've talked about benefits, and we've talked about the recession. So I'm not going to go into much detail on that. And I know we're kind of running low on time, and I want Dan to get to the fun part of this presentation. Well, I think it's fun. I think it's cool, actually.
Okay. Well, let's jump into it. Thank you, Leslie. Yeah. It's an awesome coverage of all of those topics. Your commentary is duly noted and very appreciated. So what does this all mean? I mean, we know that not every company has the same distribution or percentage uptake as this table of factors that we put in front of you the picks. So we need to give each company a chance to bring your own organizational maturity or your own goals and recognize your own advantages or disadvantages or your uniqueness around the labor shortages. There's just so many factors at play, because how these play out in your organization and your industry will be very different. It's not a one-size-fits-all methodology. So we have these documents, and we're more than happy to give them out to you. We're going to give them the contact points at the end, or even book time with you to go over these processes. But it's a prioritization exercise. It's super simple. I do this in PowerPoint just because it's easier to give out. I also have an Excel version as well. So in the following phase, we're going to take each of these 11 items and we're going to discuss the impact it has. We're not going to grade it. We're not going to, stack rank them. We're just going to say, hey, that would have a low impact, a medium impact, or a really high impact. And what that impact is going to be, the first step is assessing, is it going to produce results for our business? If we did something with AI and technology, is it going to have a high, medium, or low impact on our business? Like, is things going to change? Do I see a direct connection? And is it easy to explain that if we did some of these items, that's going to produce an impact on our business? Right? So HR has a gut feel about this. You can do it by yourself, or you can sit down as a team and collaborate and come to a consensus on this. It takes minutes to do, and it is very effective, because we're going to then take the next step and say, hey, all right, so now we're going to take these around and consider how each of these 11 items would roll out in our organization. So meaning, how difficult is it to implement? You need to figure in, hey, we going to get buy-in? Is there going to be change management? Do we have to purchase software or platforms to support it? What's the training footprint like, right? So all these things need to be factors that you consider in the difficulty of implementation. So you're going to literally take those items that you've previously ranked on the impact of the business and then rate their difficulty to deploy. Again, gut feel, high, medium, or low. The next step, we're going to do one more rating of all these 11 items, and this one is going to be the overall cost of an implementation. Again, things to consider: software, implementation, support, guidance, training, any associated products to support the practice that you need, whatever you need to get it done. And then you're going to do the same. So you've got a grade for impact on the business, the difficulty, and the cost. Now this takes us to the fun part. Here's where you start manipulating this data. So I'm going to give you, if you want, one of these tables in Excel, and you're just going to start putting in to these tables that we're going to supply to you: business impact versus difficulty of implementation, business impact versus cost of implementation, till you get to a point where you have each of these items pegged into these boxes. So it's a 9-box grid. You're going to take this, and in this example, we've got all the items in a fictitious company: impact on the business versus difficulty of implementation. Well, right here, it's telling me performance management and measuring are really high. So is change HR and the human experience. They would have a big impact on our organization. Learning and development, not so much. Job role transformation, not so much. So once you kind of prioritize these things, your team needs to discuss where you have the energy to do things. I always suggest 2 things. 1, pick one opportunity that's going to make a difference. And it's usually something that is, easy to implement and has a big impact, right? So you're going to take these little tables that we can supply to you, and you're going to put in action. So I've given you some examples here. Define corporate goals, or maybe train managers on performance ratings. The people needs are connecting managers to those performance-based skills, defining the cycles for evaluations. We need a platform that's going to do this, and how are we going to measure it? So just set out a simple plan to look at what this would take shape, and then discuss if your organization has the capability and the potential to execute on this plan. So it's really about a prioritization exercise and getting you to the very early stages of understanding all of these 11 trends in HR and how they're going to come together and make you move forward with whatever the uniqueness of your organization requires. Wow. Whew. Timing.
Oh, yeah. That's excellent. Good job.
These are cool. Check these out.
Yeah, so for next steps, we're obviously going to share the deck. You can do your prioritization. Wow, I need a coffee. Exercise. Go through that together. And then, of course, you want to learn more about us and what we do. We're here to help you. We're here to help you go through the exercise. Dan's awesome at this stuff as well. Very awesome at this stuff. Now, these cool little circles here are QR codes. If you take a picture of that, they'll pull up all of our contact information, and so you can reach out to us directly. Okay.
So our email and phone numbers are there for the conventional, but if you want to just hold your camera up and use your phone, and then it'll, as you zoom in, and it'll recognize the QR code, and you just tap on it, and it'll immediately take you to a digital business card for myself or Leslie. Okay, so we're going to leave those up on the screen. Any comments or questions that are open, Sarah? I know you've been running the chat for us. All good. It looks like everything's been answered. I see them. And in the chat?
It sure does. Yeah, you guys did a great job, it seems.
Okay. Well, it is 2 o'clock. Our time is over. My thanks ever so much for the brilliant and talented Leslie Dalzell for all of her tremendous work on this. She is just such a pivotal part to this program. And I like working with you. It's just a great experience to spend time and work with you on these projects.
Right back at you, Dan.
Awesome. Thank you all. Everyone have a great day, and thanks for joining us.